All right. Perfect. Great.
Hi, guys.
A few people trickling
Hey,
in.
I'll mute myself now. We're in a new office and it is 75 degrees in my office today. It's a bit crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I would file a human rights complaint. Discrimination against people from northern climes.
Staff can't file. We're the only people who are not allowed.
I'm going to file on your behalf. Just it's so offensive.
I'm good.
You're working in an office that's 75 degrees. The staff can't file, so you can discriminate, be the executive director of the Human Rights Commission and or a staff there discriminate at will against your other colleagues. Good to know. I know where I need to work in the future.
So we're recording, Paul?
We're recording, we're live. We're just waiting
So
for
no dad jokes then, Amanda, is what you're saying?
I'm just
jokes are great.
note my words, my friend.
We're just a few people are trickling in still, so we'll wait just a few more seconds before we get started. We're just our lovely panelists. We're just chatting a little bit here. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. All right. So just a few more seconds and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in today. All right. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and start us off today. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to go ahead and see here. Yeah, 203. Okay, so if this is your first time tuning in with us, my name is Hannah Kaploon, pronouns she and her, and I'm the project coordinator at PLEAC. So as you join us for today's webinar, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you are on, who the traditional keepers of the land are, what the treaty relationship is, or if it's unceded territory. I am located here in Toronto, Ontario, and it's the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to thank you so much for joining us for PLEAC's webinar on evaluating community projects, tips and tricks for project managers. We have a panel of fantastic speakers today, and they are Amanda Periag, principal at Periag Group. We have Paul Chuck, evaluator over in PEI, and we have Laura K. Bird, project manager at PEI Human Rights Commission on the SHIFT project. So more bio details were included in the registration process. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. Before I pass it along to our great speakers today, please know that this session is being recorded. Everyone will receive the link to the recording after the webinar is done, and the link will also be posted to PLEAC's website as well. There's a brief survey at the end of the webinar for you to know about as well, so take a minute out of your day if you can to complete it. This will help us continue to improve our programming overall. And finally, and most importantly, our speakers today have sort of designed this presentation to involve, a fair amount of time for open discussion. So you're highly encouraged today to use the Q&A and chat function below throughout the entirety of the webinar. Our speakers are looking forward to answering any questions that you might have around evaluation within this presentation. So feel free to ask away or share any anecdotal experiences along the way as we sort of move through the presentation today. So that's enough sort of on my end for now. Without further ado, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Hannah. My name is Amanda Periag, and I'm going to be starting things off today, folks. So this is going to be an overview of a few evaluation topics that Paul and I think are very, very important, and that in conversation with Laura have emerged as being particularly helpful or riveting. This really is meant to be interactive, so feel free to post your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and then we have different spots where we'll pause and we'll respond to the questions. And I just want to say that for myself and Paul, who work together all the time, I was his favorite graduate student eons ago in graduate school, as I always mention, and it's true. We've been working together for about 20 years, and we often have the opportunity to speak about evaluation, what evaluation means, how you do it correctly. We do not often have the opportunity to sit down with a client such as Laura and discuss what works, what doesn't work, what could be done differently, how she's hearing what we're saying, and vice versa. So this is an incredible opportunity here today. So thank you so much for having us. Paul and Laura, did you want to quickly introduce yourself in a couple of seconds, and then we'll go forward?
Go ahead, Laura.
All right, now that I've figured out the unmute button better, I have met many of you who have participated in other PLEAC meetings. So yep, I'm the project manager for the SHIFT project in PEI, whose focus is on changing workplace culture.
I'm Paul Chuck. I'm also in PEI up on the North Shore. And I'm with the Atlantic Evaluation Group, which is a partner to the PEI Group. I'm an associate with PEI Group, and Amanda's an associate with my firm. And as Amanda mentioned, we've been working together for a long time. I'm not going to tell any stories about grad school because we don't have the time, but it's a pleasure to be with you here today and to walk through this presentation. And I am credentialed evaluator with the Canadian Evaluation Society, which is a voluntary professional designation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so on the next slide, you will see 3 main areas that we're going to cover off today. If you want to just go to the next slide there, Paul. Perfect. Thank you. We think that these are critical areas that community-based organizations want to be aware of and want to do well when they're doing evaluation. This is Paul and my wisdom. You may speak to others who have different wisdom, but this is where we are. So we're going to share our experiences around the evaluation approach and how we think it affects the usefulness, the key steps to an evaluation and why we really think it's important to articulate them and follow them, and how critical we think it is to describe how you will achieve results. So on the next slide, all I want to mention here is that there are so many different evaluation approaches and methodologies, and this is an area that is constantly evolving. It's actually quite hard to keep up with the developments in this area. It's just that Paul and I, because we've been doing this work with community-based organizations for eons and eons, we feel that we have this work down to some key areas that will be really, really helpful for you. And one of them is picking the correct approach and seeing how it will affect the usefulness. So on the next slide, we have a number of, there we go, thanks, Paul. We have a number of points here, particularly around participatory evaluation. So for myself and Paul, we really feel that involving the key people in the evaluation from the beginning is where the evaluation can be made or broken, really, in our view. So that era of having an evaluator just swoop in, have a couple conversations with the executive director, swoop out, and then come back a year later and hand you the report, that's gone. Definitely in our view, and I think in the sector as a whole. For us, it's really critical to involve the key people, such as Laura here with the SHIFT project. It could be the executive director, could be other stakeholders, could be volunteers. It's really critical to identify these folks at the very beginning, because then it means you're identifying evaluation questions that are not just relevant to ourselves as the evaluator, but they're relevant to the project and to those who are going to be impacted by the project as well. It's also really important to understand what the findings are going to be used for, who they'll be used by, how they're supposed to impact, all of those sorts of areas. And if you just speak to one particular person who doesn't have a high level lens, who doesn't understand the project intimately in the way that we like to do this, then you may miss things. There's also a danger of having questions that mean a lot to us, make a really good report, but that create a report in the end that's useless for people such as Laura K. Bird here. You want to have a report at the end that really reflects your reality, what actually took place in the project, and what findings actually came out that helped strengthen that project as you were going on, in our view. So again, it's really critical to take the right approach and speak to the correct people from the very beginning, in our view anyway. It definitely takes more work, but it's the payoff is super, super huge. For us, having that communication all the way through is pretty key. In participatory evaluation, we want to make sure that the program performance is improved while we're doing that evaluation. We don't want to wait to the end and say, oh, well, yeah, you missed that whole group. Okay, better luck next time. It's been 3 years of your life, right? That is helpful to no one in mine and Paul's view. Paul, I'm speaking for you a lot. So if I'm saying something about your view, you feel free to, okay, I got a thumbs up on Paul's view. You see, that's because he loves me this very much. All I was going to say, the last bit here is that when we're providing our evaluation reports at the end, we often say that we want these reports to be pretty anticlimactic. We want it to be that the project lead who we're working with goes, yeah, I know all of this stuff because we've been talking about it for the last 2 to 3 years, and there were no actual surprises in here. Does that mean that the project lead is writing the report or is forcing us to put particular information in the report? No, because we do this ethically and we do this appropriately. We're very rigorous and we're evidence-driven. What it means is that we're communicating that much. That's all I wanted to mention there. Okay, the next slide is good, Paul. So the evaluation approach affects the usefulness for sure. And here we have a little bit of language around the developmental evaluation approach. So the developmental evaluation approach was started to be popularized about 10 years ago. And the idea is that when you're doing a developmental evaluation, the evaluator is really part of the team. And they bring all of their insights, all of their skills to the project planning, the development of the project, and the refinement of the project. We can certainly, when we're doing this, develop a logic model or a theory of change to highlight opportunities that we hadn't considered ahead of time. For us, the critical piece here is that in a developmental evaluation, we're providing feedback in as close to real time as possible. So in my example earlier, waiting 2 years to say that this particular workshop isn't working, it just wouldn't happen in a developmental evaluation approach. And so Paul and myself, we really like this approach combined with the participatory approach, which is that constant communication. And in our view, we're really creating something of an evaluation that is the best of both worlds. Now, having said that, I'm going to throw it over to Laura on the next slide here, who can tell the unvarnished truth about how well this approach works.
Thank you. My theory is that this approach worked really well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it came to be for me. I had a co-chair when I started the project here at the Human Rights Commission. And I have to confess that we were both a little anxious and nervous about the word evaluation. We definitely had a bit of a hangover from the idea that it's a judgy thing, where it's looking at your performance or whether you actually do a good job. And that's definitely not how it unfolded in our experience with AEG and Paul and Amanda. So I had to really let go of that idea. And that was easy to do when I got that outside perspective that really was looking at, okay, where do you want to go and how can we help you get there? So the where that I wanted to go was really influenced by a work plan that was not created by me, but that I inherited. And it was a really nice, good, strong, clear work plan for the 5 years of funding for this project. So sharing that work plan with Paul and Amanda gave an opportunity for us to work cooperatively and to really build together what we thought could be a framework for how we do evaluation. The first part was definitely more labor intensive. And by that, I don't want to say that it was onerous, because it wasn't onerous. It just took some time. And part of that time was a learning curve for me to really grasp the idea that we're really looking at the evaluations as not cut in stone, but a little more fluid, and how we could change things based on whatever the circumstances were, but still try and achieve the goals. I will say that for some of you, it might have been similar, maybe not, but less than 12 weeks into this position, COVID hit. So for me, I immediately needed a major pivot. And because Paul and Amanda had a strong understanding of what the project was and my goals, even though we're only 12 weeks in, they really helped to guide me through adjusting and making the changes that were necessary. At one point, I was concerned because I felt things had to be done A, B, C. And then I was reassured that no, sometimes things have to be done A, H, J. But we had it all in front of us. I understood what all those things were because they were out there. So I don't know how some of you may have felt. Perhaps you have more experience and when you're actually doing the evaluations, but really letting go of the judgment part and really looking at how do we track the answers to the questions we have, or how do we track our progress, and not just a small track either. It's looking at tracking it over 5 years. So not looking at, we have our little markers along the way and then sort of our long-term ones. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but that would be, oh, I'm just reading on the slide here. Yeah, we actually hit a little bump in the project. We've hit a lot of bumps, but this bump was particularly frustrating for me. And I was like, how do we get past this bump? And so working together, we created a survey that turned out to be wildly successful. It wasn't something we intended on doing from the beginning, but we realized we were connecting, we needed more solid feedback. We used the survey as a means to actually get the ideas in front of people. And in a small province, PEI is 155,000 people. We had 1,600 people respond to a survey on workplace sexual harassment. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And we're still building and working on that. That's all I'll say, because I can talk a lot. So I'm done.
I was just going to add something actually, Laura, to what you were saying, which is when we first connected, I think you were really clear about, where your lens was. And that was really helpful for us as evaluators, because we were able to go, okay, she's concerned that we're basically putting you under a microscope and trying to find fault. And because we started with really open communication, we could explain that no, that's not how evaluation works, that we're looking at how the program works and we're not trying to catch it out, we're trying to facilitate it moving forward. So I think that starting point was a really good starting point, and that building of communication was really important. I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Paul, I think you are going to the next slide.
I think I am not.
Okay.
So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions or observations. So that's sort of our goal, is we like a participatory developmental project improvement focus on evaluations. We realize that a lot of these projects are funded by federal or nonprofit funders, and or using your own hard-earned organizational money. And you may have to meet the needs of those funders. Like, you may have to report back on the 4 things you said in your proposal that you have to go look up because it was 3 years ago. And we do a little bit of extra effort, and participatory and developmental evaluation sort of, you get more involved with the project and the program. As Amanda said, you don't just come back like a year later with a report saying the funder said you need these 4 things. So here are the 4 things from the funder. So we just try to make it useful for the project, and that's part of being the participatory and developmental. So we're looking to hear if you have any questions for us, and or observations about like whether you do something participatory and has it helped your project, or has it helped with the evaluation of your project?
So we do have a question, Paul.
I see.
So the question is, can we hear more about the specifics of the public-facing survey and its relationship to the content/focus areas of the evaluation?
Do you want to start first, or will I, Laura?
Okay, I'm going to start in the real layman's terms, in terms of like, what it did in terms of the content and focus areas is the survey opened doors for me that I was finding were closed. So because I had hard data from local businesses and organizations, it garnered some attention towards the issue. Now we're not completely finished with, we're releasing next week the full survey because we were trying to time it in different ways. So we had sort of a small release and a launch of a safety kit we created. So having that survey and having these opportunities to release the information has really helped open doors. That's really what it's done, both through media and through chambers of commerce and education, government, school boards. It's just been a real, that's really what it did for me.
And she wants to know, Laura, I'm just responding in the chat here. I'm just saying the public will the survey be distributed? And the survey report is being finalized right now. We've had a presentation and multiple people are wanting to see it. So I'm just assuming it's public, you wouldn't mind sharing it.
The answer is yes. Yeah, we'll get that out there. We're just like fine tuning things and making sure everything's perfect. So yeah, okay. It will be released soon and I'll share it with Hannah for distribution.
So I'd like to weigh in on a couple of quick things. And I see we have a question in the question and answer as well. So one is sort of how did it connect to the content or focus area of the evaluation? So Laura, my understanding of it is the way I conceptualized it. Laura was trying to distribute resources and education and supports to employers in particular about workplace sexual harassment. And we want to evaluate those resources and supports. But the uptake wasn't great because of, in some areas, like restaurant sector in particular, because of the pandemic. And so how can we evaluate a program if the restaurant industry and the tourism industry wasn't sort of participating, and how do you get others to participate? And we didn't know a lot about the need for the support. So the evaluation wants to know, well, what needs is this meeting? So by doing the survey, we learn more about what the needs are, and then it helps us to evaluate how the program is meeting those needs. So that's sort of, it was their content area and background research. And that's very developmental. Well, that's not an evaluation activity per se, doing the public survey, because it wasn't an evaluative survey. It was just learning about people's experiences with workplace sexual harassment, but it helped the program. And it's going to help our evaluation.
Yeah.
So then the next question is the promotion, which I'm going to throw right back to Laura, because she was the communications lead on this.
Okay, so before I talk to you about promotion, I am going to say that one of the things that we did with the survey is we really carefully constructed it, and our focus was hearing from islanders. So we wanted to hear from all Prince Edward Islanders, so everyone in the province. What actually ended up happening was we mostly heard from people who had had experience of workplace sexual harassment. So it's what do you call it, Paul? A convenience sample? Is that right? Yeah. So it worked differently in that way. And the key point was really just to open up and listen and hear. So I will tell you that I ended up on our local radio, CBC radio show on the first Friday in August. And I came on at 4:30, drive home time. And by that Monday morning, we had over 300 responses just for people who had gone to the our website and clicked on the link. So it turned out it was a survey that people wanted to respond to. I sent it out to major employment groups as best I could. And social media. Social media was big. Our biggest response target group, our biggest response group was for people between the ages of 25 and 49. I also was able to have some key partners distribute it. So the government of Prince Edward Island sent it out to their entire email list. I had the university made it accessible to people, but I would say social media was our best things.
So there's a question, yeah, around the traumatic nature.
Yes. So with the survey, we were not looking to tap into people's trauma, and we did take a very trauma-informed approach. So every page of the survey had links to resources, to a resource page where people who felt that they wanted to access some help on PEI could do so. And we put the warning very clearly on every page about keeping yourself safe and not participating. Most of our questions were related more to, checkbox questions. The thing that was really shocking with the survey, however, was that we put in boxes that people could fill in, and a huge number of people filled in and told their stories. It wasn't necessary. But part of taking all the time to construct it was making sure constantly that we were trauma informed in how we were asking the questions, and making sure that we were not, and we were only gathering the information we needed. So for example, a question was, what was the impact for you in your workplace? And we had tons of options, and people could pick whatever impact they had, from quitting to feeling sick and nauseous to tension to not being productive. We had a whole list. So that's how we did that part. So
And
I'm aware of the time.
Sorry.
So
Okay. Yeah, we can continue. Sure.
we can answer some more at the end too, if you want. So
For sure. Okay.
Before we go on to the next topic, yeah, I think that's a good example of the survey, and we were glad Laura put it on the slide, because it wasn't an evaluation activity. 20 years ago, as an evaluator, you would have probably sat back, or maybe 25 years ago, and just, well, the program is going to do whatever it's going to do. But this is not a clinical trial of an intervention. It's a complex social issue in a real world with other things like a pandemic going on. So being developmental, we said, well, this can help the evaluation by getting more information on what the need is for the services of the SHIFT project. And it's going to help the SHIFT project. So we sort of helped in with other skills like survey design unrelated to the evaluation. So it's just sort of a participatory team approach. And, so it's a little bit more flexible model. It's not like saying, well, we're evaluating something now that we actually contributed to, and developmental evaluation is set up that way. And we'll say in the report that we, supported the project in some ways. We've also supported the project planning through sort of the development of the theory of change that we're going to see in a few slides. And we're not a pure external independent evaluator, because Laura is contributing to the evaluation, but that will all be clear in the report. But just kind of shows you how the participatory model allows the evaluation and the project to sort of unfold using everyone's skill sets. All right, I think then we're going to go on to the next question, next section. So key evaluation steps and why you need them. So just a disclaimer up front that we try to be participatory and we try to inform program development. We're never able to do everything to the extent that we want. There's always time constraints, there's always budget constraints, and there's constraints on how many people are willing to contribute. So for example, like we like to have a lot of partner input into evaluations, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. So we're doing another project with PLEAC, and we're doing a project in PEI, doing a project with After Me Too, where we did have more partner input into those evaluations. So, but they weren't as developmental as the one with Laura, which is why we chose this example today. So key evaluation steps. Now there's a lot of evaluation approaches out there. And we've got some resources at the end where you can look at some of the steps and why you do the steps. We've kind of, Amanda and I over the years have kind of distilled like, okay, pretty much all of them have these 6 steps, and maybe we've combined a couple of steps, etc. So we've distilled a few steps that it's sort of our cheat sheet to the evaluation, that we don't have to go look up an evaluation book every time. And so the steps you'll see on the screen, the first step is engaging key people, and the second step is describing the program. One of the points you notice here is not, this is not a highly methodological step. It's a method of evaluation, but it's not like a research method step. It's not like the first step was how do we have to validate a survey and make sure it's a reliable and validate a survey. No, the first 2 steps are about the people and about the project or the program that you're working with. And that's necessary to ensure cooperation, to complete the evaluation, to interpret the findings, and to ensure results are used. Like if you're into evaluation, Michael Quinn Patton is very focused on utilization focused evaluation. Evaluations are only as good as the extent to which they're used to improve the program or to establish accountability for the program. I think one of the critical things for us, and particularly how Amanda and I like to practice evaluation, is that allows us to focus or tailor or the evaluation to the particular program or project, to the particular context of we're doing this evaluation of shift in PEI during a pandemic where one of their target groups was the restaurant and tourism industry. So those steps got us a little bit beyond what were the 4 things that you need to report to the funder and more into what do we need to learn about the program. And so some of the other steps are in there, your standard evaluation framework and plan. You've got to collect the data. Now, this survey that we talked about was not really part of that. We're doing focus groups with participants and surveys of people that are in workshops that Laura is offering, and the standard things of analyzing the data. It's not just analyzing data anymore, it's interpreting the results in the context of the program. So this program is happening in a pandemic. It's also happening where there's other partners in PEI that are working on workplace sexual harassment, and while there's things happening in the media. So it's interpreting the results. Why is the workshop working better or worse in some areas? How could the workshop be improved? What do these results mean from year 1 and 2 of the program? What do they mean for years 3 and 4? And one of the big things evaluators get hammered on is making unfeasible recommendations. So an evaluator comes in, looks at the results of the survey and says, oh, you need to make your workshops more interactive and you need to get more people involved. Well, if you would interpret the results with the program, instead of just launching into what you should do differently, you might say, well, why are we seeing these results? Well, the pandemic had a big impact on the extent to which restaurants are involved because they're in survival mode. So then what does that mean? What's feasible in terms of a recommendation? Just keep going down the same road that's not working? Maybe you need a different approach. And that's why we came up with the public survey to raise more awareness that it is actually happening. You can't just dismiss it. There's a lot more of this happening in island workplaces than maybe people realized. And also to use the results, and going back to Amanda's point about developmental and not waiting 3 years later to say, this is what we found in the workshop. So that's helpful. And so now we're gonna turn this over to Laura, and Laura's just going to, sorry, I with so many things open on my screen, it's hard to advance the slides, but turn it over to Laura, and she's going to talk about this, how she sees these steps unfolding.
I'll explain a little bit further when we go along to some other steps. When we look, I have a chart that I use as well. So Paul talked about how the restaurant industry, which was supposed to be a prime focus, has been a bit of a bust. So not happy with the progress there at all, but it's helpful to know why. So that interpreting why are we hitting these stumbling blocks, what happens to go on, what's going on. The idea of engaging key people I ended up getting a high school steering committee together. We have actually had a curriculum approved for a mandatory class in Prince Edward Island called CEO 10. And that class every student has to take. And we created some curriculum supports that teachers can use. So they don't have to use our curriculum supports, but we're pretty proud of them. That was a component that I thought was going to be really difficult. And by engaging those key people and describing how it fit into what their curriculum goals were, that was one of the smoothest ones. So we actually piloted the 3-day curriculum in schools last spring, and we now have it. It's available, it's online, and did some asynchronous education for teachers as well around it. So that one was kind of a big success that showed how that engaging key people and describing the program. We don't have the full, we don't know yet the data necessarily. We're still looking at, we collected data along the way in terms of what needed to change and what needed to be adapted in a smaller group, but now we're going to look at how teachers feel about using it and how we can support it. So, and I'm going to stop there because then we'll have more questions at the end, perhaps.
I think we're going to stop at this point and open it up for questions. Any questions about how we've distilled the 6 steps? Are there any steps that you have used in your evaluations that we've missed? Are there steps that you're not using in an evaluation, and why that is? And we have resources at the end, as I mentioned, about these steps. So any thoughts about like the stepwise approach to evaluation and particularly the participatory steps? Any observations about whether those things have worked for you, have not worked for you? I put everyone to sleep. That always happens during my portion of the slide. So it's going to be back to Amanda now to wake, and Laura to wake people up.
I'll add in too that the step process, you don't, like, the steps are nice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but sometimes you have to go back and engage different people. So you can get to step 4 and then go, oh, I got to go back and get other people engaged.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so the last trick area is describing how you will achieve your results. And this has become more and more important in the era of performance measurement, which I would say is in the last 10 to 15 years where it's really erupted. When I first started doing evaluations, I remember going to an establishment and speaking to the person there, because that was pre-COVID and you could actually have face-to-face conversations. And I said, how do you know this program is working? And the person there said, well, I can see the smiles on the children's faces. And while that is glorious, if it's not an indicator and if it's not a result, it's not going to work anymore in an evaluation. So what you'll see on the next slide is that it is actually really critical to take your program, take your project, and break it down so that it's really clear to anyone looking at either your logic model or your theory of change, what it is you're doing and how you know when you get there. What Paul and I love seeing when we do this is that we're articulating a series of changes that need to happen in order to reach your result. And you're doing it at a particular point in time. You're doing it when we start the evaluation. This can shift and can change. But at that point in time, when you sit down, or when Paul and I sit down, and in this case with Laura, what we did is we said, okay, precisely what are we evaluating? Because there may be some steps that you're taking in your project that we aren't going to be evaluating. They're not part of this particular evaluation, although it's important that they actually get done. So you need to have an office space. It's very important that you can work from somewhere. That's not something we're capturing within the evaluation as an example. We find that it's really important to demonstrate how we're going to get to those results. And on the next slide, when I show it to you, you'll see that breaking that down and walking that back actually is quite transformative. because many times it's validating to realize just how much work is going to go into either getting a program off the ground or giving it liftoff in a particular capacity. It's also really helpful when you have a logic model or a theory of change. That's really one page that describes your whole project, your whole program. So to me, it's a very elegant way to explain your project to someone who doesn't know it, right? So they can see all the pieces and all the elements right there in that one spot. Also, because we are articulating what we see as your outcomes, we can show how this project is going to contribute to the greater good, to a particular initiative, whatever it is. And I think that putting this all together in a theory of change ends up being quite a simple, elegant, and to me, it ends up being quite an easy way to identify what is happening, particularly with that project. Now, if we can go to the next two, maybe we'll deal with the question that came in at the end. Okay, so Paul, yeah, so this is the theory of change for the SHIFT initiative that Laura is leading. And I just want to say before we go into this, there are so many ways that you can do a theory of change. This is the way that Paul and I tend to do ours. We co-developed this with Laura. So yeah. We looked at the documents that you gave us, Laura, so your project plan and your work plan, and I think your proposal, right? Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, to us, it seems that there are these pieces in blue on the left here where I'm sitting that need to happen before the pieces in green, before you start getting results in orange, and before you start having outcomes in red. And if you just look at this, having never seen it before, you can see, my goodness, okay, there are 5 steps that have to be accomplished in blue in order for the steps in green to really flourish. So, you know, things like identifying the needs and gaps in services and education, that's not nothing. In fact, that's something that started and then we came back to with this survey that we just did, right? So that's a huge undertaking. And isn't it going to be helpful if you're a project lead and, you know, your funders, the executive directors, whoever it is, are saying, hey, what's happening with this project, to be able to share them and say, yeah, before I can get restaurants and other businesses to implement the management alert system, they have to know that there's a need out there that would require that system. So I need that awareness. I need that preparation and engagement to happen in blue. So these are not carved in stone, as I said. These are the ones that we identified at the start of the evaluation. And I'll turn it to the next slide so Laura can comment about how things unfolded.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, that the actual using this has been really helpful for me. So I'm not a numbers person. There's a great question in here that I won't be answering, but I found this really easy for me to follow. And I pull this out as much as I pull out my work plan because it helps to keep me accountable. So there's the whole idea when you're dealing with the projects that you like things come at you. And sometimes there's that whole idea of project spread, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting involved in too many things. And then I know, okay, I have to tighten it back up. So if you look on here, this is where I'm at now, or was at sort of at the end of this November. So the blue that is in a lighter color, those are things, anything that's in the lighter shades, rather, the blue, green, and orange, those are things that have actually like, okay, we're moving on this. We can track that this happened and is happening and is, I'm really pleased with where they're at. You notice there's nothing in the later results yet. That's still coming up. The things that indicate a positive, a plus, those are things that are still ongoing. So those are things where we may have not done as much as I want to do, or we haven't quite hit where I want to be, or they're just simply going to be continual and ongoing throughout the project. And the X's, now someone who went into this feeling that it was so judgy and like really worried about that kind of thing, I'm actually really comfortable looking at what hasn't been accomplished. And I know that may sound weird, but because it's really just looking at tracking this journey and telling the story of this project, those X's are important, especially when they're linked to us trying to have an understanding. I haven't given up on those things. And for those of you, I don't know how, I have a boss who also oversees my work on this project and has requested my draft for our year-end reporting, so we can get working on that. And I might have to change a little bit of my work plan in light of those factors. Just really helps me get a really clear picture. I like pictures, I like stories. So having this out there is useful for how my brain works when it comes to things. And honestly, if you'd have told me 2.5 years ago, I'd be kind of okay with the failures. And there have been like missteps, trips, failures. I wouldn't have believed it of myself. But now this is where I'm at. And I wouldn't say that the failures are for lack of trying. They're sometimes situational, and we're still working on figuring those things out. So go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add a comment there, Laura, that I think there's, for the evaluator, this is very easy for us because if we're evaluating a few different programs at once, we can like look back, and if we're doing a focus group with participants in some of Laura's programs, we can go, okay, yes, I remember now where we are in this project.
Yes.
But there's also a little bit of protection with the project that often with funders, you have to get over in the right-hand column and say, you're going to enhance awareness and knowledge of rights and responsibilities. And, you know, maybe Laura's boss is like, well, how many people have you enhanced their knowledge of rights? You know, but then when you see that, look at all the steps we have to take to get there.
Yeah.
That's why it's a 5-year project. And this is the successes that we've had so far, which is laying the groundwork for the right-hand side. So we see these things as being helpful for the evaluation, but also helpful for the project. So we do, I'm sorry, Laura, do you have additional comments here? Because we do have some questions as well.
Nope, there's a bunch of questions, including one I want to answer.
You are going to answer the graphics one first, even though it's the last question in. I know it.
No, I'm not going to. No, there's a question that someone asked about for projects providing legal advice for workplace sexual harassment. Do you have any tips on collecting data from clients, keeping in mind that they do not want to talk about the experience repeatedly or with new people? Yes, I do. And I would say, know what it is you need to know. So if your thing is providing legal advice, maybe the simple question is, was this helpful? Yes, no, maybe. You don't have to go into any trauma. You don't have to tax them in any way, because really the response you need isn't about what happened to them. It's about whether the information you provided they found useful. So that would be a recommendation. Like, so what my project deals with trying to change people's behavior and attitudes, and a strict education project just can be something as simple as, you know, did you understand our materials? Yes, no, maybe. So being really clear on what it is that you're tracking, what you're evaluating. That would be my answer if that's helpful. And if not, send another question. I'll see if I can help.
Yeah, I'll definitely add on. I agree with that it's really keeping the focus on the services that are offered as opposed to anything about them as an individual. We have hits or misses. We find that when people know there's a large number of people contributing to something, like it's a workshop with 30 people or 20 people, and they're going to do an anonymous survey. Well, it could be anyone in that 20 or 30 people. We found it much harder when for services where there's smaller groups of people and they're much more like individual advice and things like that. So it's much easier to identify people, and we've had some successes. It's when we've kept it very anonymous, like surveys with open ends that they can answer or not answer. We've had some success with that. But when we get into really small samples of you provide legal advice to 12 people, that can get much, much more difficult to get feedback on.
The other thing I would also say is you can be really creative in how you collect that information. So as long as, like, I hear you on the theory of change, you have the colors. So I gave a workshop to a group of employees, and someone said, we're pretty sure one of our employees is illiterate. we're pretty sure that he fakes through everything and all of that kind of stuff. So I was like, well, okay, so I need to change some things, including my evaluation. So I actually passed out stickers and then had like a 1 to 6 scale and was really clear what the numbers were, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I read out, I only had 4 questions. I read them out and everybody could come up and pick like a green or a yellow, or like they just had a sticker system. So it was just a way that was not personal, but just a different way to gather the information that was helpful to me.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Do you want to deal with the question of she likes the visual and how did you make it? I can say we did a plainer version of this in Microsoft Word that had the same sort of colors, but wasn't quite this pretty. So Laura, how did you make it this pretty?
I don't remember, but I think it was just taking, I think it's probably just an Excel. I can't remember because I did it so long ago.
Yeah. We use Canva for some of these things.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll often work on drafts because you're doing so much editing. I don't want to send it out. We have Erin from our evaluation team is actually on this call, and she does a lot of design works for us. And Laura has a graphics person that does design work. We find like you can do these in Word or PowerPoint quite easily.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you can get like a graphics person if you want it really, really pretty and get it out there. I know Erin on our team uses Canva, I think, Erin. I don't know if you want to put something in the quote if Erin has any advice for people about how to pretty some of these things up. Maybe you can put it in the chat, Erin, if you want to. If you don't want to,
I think the really key thing with this setup, though, is having that visual that goes from left to right, that talks about early, intermediate accomplishments and early and later results. Like I think that was really helpful to be able to read it across that way, and the connections, like that one leads to the other.
Interestingly, a lot of the federal ones go bottom to top, so they start with the goals of the department, the federal department or agency at the top, and they start at the bottom with the activities. I don't like that myself, but anyway. There's a very evaluative question in here that I just can't resist answering, and it's the question about causation and dealing with confounding influences. So I mentioned earlier, it's not like a research project where a clinical trial where you deliver an intervention exactly the same way every time. And Amanda wants to weigh in. We're going to be here for 2 hours now, just answering this one question. So often for smaller projects, we focus very heavily on getting qualitative feedback from multiple people about not just what was the service or what was the intervention or what was the resource, but what is the circumstance in which the people needed that? What do the partners have to say about it? They're working with the same client groups. What would the clients have to say? So we really try to understand the context. So we ask a lot of questions about context and how. So if you rate a question on a survey and says, this workshop was very helpful, well, that's fine, that's a rating. But the question is qualitatively, how did it help you? So if someone can explain how it helped them and how it helped them was something specific to how this project delivered the services and the content they delivered, then we're much more sure about causation. So in small projects, we rely very heavily on that. You have to be very careful about whether people actually saw it. So we're very careful to make sure we're actually getting feedback from participants, not like random public surveys where you don't know if they even really what it is they're looking at. Sometimes they could be looking at things that are a resource put out by another organization, is not even this organization, because there's a lot of workplace sexual harassment materials. Laura uses some systems, the restaurant reporting system from California. So you don't even know necessarily if it's their project, but if they can explain how it is and what helped them, then you can be sure, yeah, it was the actual workshop or it was the resource from Laura's project and not something they saw online from California.
I'm just going to add, because Paul's right, I'm just chomping at the bit here. Just one other thing, which is when we develop our evaluation plan, we identify the data sources right up front that we're going to be using in the project. And we'll often identify the questions that will be answered from using those data sources. So because we put them at the very beginning, it sort of guides us as we're going along, so we don't end up kind of grasping at data that might not be as tailored or as targeted. And as Paul said, we ask the question very specifically and make sure that we are getting a response about this program and this program only. Yes, there still might be spurious data that comes in, The rare time that that happens, we can often spot it and clean it out, eh, Paul?
We try to. It's like we said earlier, it's not a cookie cutter approach. So every situation
It's
is
not.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
you're
certainly
right.
the qualitative piece certainly helps. And then in larger scale programs, if you're doing large scale surveys and stuff or using administrative data on outcomes, it gets much more complicated. But we'd have to almost know the specifics of those. And there's a type of evaluation called contribution analysis by John Main, who recently passed away, unfortunately. But if you Google contribution analysis and evaluation, you'll find some of his materials about, he does a deep dive into how do you know what happened was a result of your program or something else. So it's all about the causation. So Sarah, I think that if you were to Google John Main, M-A-Y-N-E, and contribution analysis, that you might find some useful materials and articles there.
Well, Paul, that's a good segue to the resources slide, if you just want to flag that really quickly.
You guys are always so interested in starting on time and focusing on time. I just go with the flow. So some of the resources we hear, the steps in evaluation, I think I checked these a little while ago. Centers for Disease Control does a lot of work evaluating public health. Even though what we're evaluating here is not public health, they talk about the steps and why you need the steps, particularly engaging people. Public Health Ontario has the same thing. I don't know why all the examples are public health, but I might have been doing some public health stuff at the time, but it doesn't really matter. It's talking about engaging people in community programs meant to change public behavior. So it's broadly applicable. Betterevaluation.org is sort of my go-to thing. Forget the person's name, but it's based in Australia, where a volunteer basically started a website and said, I don't want to search all over the web to find things. I want to be able to look at it and one site and give a quick overview. So if you want to know more about developmental evaluation, go to betterevaluation.org and just Google it. And they have some resources on there too, like the Rainbow Framework has steps in an evaluation, but it's also my generic go-to resource where I want like a simple overview of something and I don't want to read a 500-page textbook. And same thing, so there's the Rainbow Framework and the developmental evaluation approach on betterevaluation.org. I don't have the, I call it bettereval.org, but it's actually betterevaluation.org is the correct link. And if you want to read a book about practical experiences in evaluation, Marvin Alkin from California is a very experienced evaluator. And he did it like over 100 evaluations. And they said, well, I'm going to write a book about all the stories of doing evaluations and the real world things we run into. So that's some resources there. And then I guess we need to turn it back. I don't think there's any additional questions. Do we need to turn it back to Hannah for a wrap up?
Thank you.
Thanks for the nice comment, Linda.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Your payment's in the mail.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that was perfectly on time. I'm so impressed, even though, yeah, but I want to say
Teamwork.
Yeah, exactly. Teamwork makes the dream work. Great job. So I just want to say thank you so much to Amanda, Paul, and Laura so much. Fantastic speakers today. I want to thank you for such an informative presentation. And also thanks to everyone for joining us today as well. We really appreciate you asking some great questions, of course, and sharing some, obviously, like Linda just mentioned, sort of some nice feedback there. So thank you very much. I do want to just mention again really quickly that the link to the webinar recording will be made available to everyone afterwards, or just generally shortly. Everyone should receive it in case you missed it or want to pass it along. The slide deck, also a lot of helpful information there. So if anyone was scrambling, trying to take notes, we will be circulating that around as well, if that's helpful to you. And if you're interested in connecting directly with any of our speakers, please feel free to send me an email, because everyone should have it, or in any case, it will get to you, and I can happily connect you to everybody here if you have any other sort of direct questions that you wanted to ask or connect with our speakers. So other than that, have a lovely rest of your week, everyone. Stay safe and warm. And again, thanks to our speakers, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.